Welcome everyone to the Keynote Theatre for our final talk before lunch, and we've a fantastic panel here. I'm sure you'll agree, a strong lineup. There used to be in part of strong lineups, but this is certainly a strong lineup we have today. I'll just quickly introduce each member of the panel very quickly, and then we'll get underway. I think we have until about 1:20 until we break for lunch, so good bit of time. We'll do a bit of a Q&A, and then we'll maybe throw it open halfway through for a few questions, and then we'll continue after that, if that's okay. So any questions, we have a roaming mic that you can put them to the panel. So, okay, first of all, we'll start with Andrew Trimble on the end. Andrew, of course, former Ulster Rugby and Ireland player and co-founder of Kairos. So great insight as a player and in the tech world. We have Paddy Tally, Down manager. Paddy and I were at an event a few weeks ago, actually, so we're getting used to this, Paddy. So great insight from Paddy on the GAA side, and also from Marty Clarke. Marty, former GAA player and Aussie Rules player, now working for STATSports. And we have, last but certainly not least, Keefe, head coach of Belfast Giants and former ice hockey player as well. So we have fantastic insight, really, from a player's perspective, from a manager's perspective, and we've got the tech side as well. So plenty to go on for our talk on the evolution of technology in sport. Okay, Andrew, we'll kick off with you, if that's okay. You're furthest away, but you didn't escape me. Just, I suppose, as probably our most recently retired player, Andrew, what big changes have you seen as a player and from your move into working for Kairos? For those of you that don't know what Kairos is, it's I hope I get this right, Andrew. It's a digital planner for sporting organisations, correct?
Yeah, that's a decent pitch. Yeah, that's perfect. Elevator pitch there. I suppose, having played kind of top-level sport for a few years, I encountered a few issues and problems with planning and managing and understanding requirements and programs and that kind of stuff. The way that was communicated was always quite haphazard, with whiteboards and WhatsApps. So I used that experience and got together with Gareth Quinn, founder of Digital DNA, and we built Kairos. We've been confused for Kairos.
Yeah, I saw them come in funny and thought, yeah.
For me, one of the biggest changes is GPS. Obviously, Marty will be able to give us a bit more information on that, but there's so many metrics for sports people nowadays, and there's so many ways of kind of quantifying how good someone is, which goes so far to understand kind of strength and depth and managing injuries and managing kind of peaks for training periods during seasons. And it's nice to have a scientific background, so it's nice to be able to quantify players and look at and understand where they are, where they're peaking, and if you're on track. And that can be a real confidence booster to players. If you've hit your metrics, then it's nice to know it's very likely I'm going to perform this weekend because my metrics are on track. So that's been quite a big progression in sports in the last couple of years.
And just from your perspective, Andrew, I mean, are players, open to changes in that regard, or is it something that they're still quite wary of?
I think typically younger players would be more open. I was probably the exception in that as my career went on and as I gradually started to mature, I started to understand a process and a slightly more engineered approach to performance. But I'd say that's probably not normal. I think guys who come into it are slightly more open-minded to the kind of what's available to sports people and what kind of training tools and helpful bits of technology can kind of aid performance. As a youngster, if you come into that, then you're immersed in that and you understand the metrics more. You understand, again, the GPS metrics that maybe some of the older guys wouldn't appreciate just because you think back in the day, this is the way I performed, this is the way I've always performed, and there's a little bit of emotion attached to it. Yeah. But I think some of the young guys would really harness that and really get the benefits from it.
Okay, since you've mentioned GPS a couple of times, we will go to Marty, if that's okay, because that's Marty's speciality. Marty, as I said, is a former GAA and Aussie Rules player, but works for STATSports, who are the world's leading provider of GPS trackers for sport. Marty, can you just give us a bit of an insight into what STATSports do and what you do with them?
Yeah, of course. It's a Newry-based company, so very local company to Northern Ireland. basically, as you mentioned, we're the top manufacturer and distributor of GPS systems for athletes in the world. We feel there that we have the best product. We have the best clients in the world in terms of European soccer, World Rugby, GAA, etc., and also kind of the unique aspects for STATSports. Some of the other companies that do GPS, and there's plenty of them out there, hand the system over to a club and you work it out, whereas STATSports have more account managers who look after the elite teams than they would have sales people or any of that, and that's to try and help grow with the club. Every club will have different range of metrics that they want to focus on. Some will be during pre-season, there'll be more endurance, and then they'll swap that round for sort of more game-specific stuff as well. But the company is constantly evolving. There's so many in the software team. We're just growing all over the world. Australia's a big zone we're trying to hit at the minute as well. So when you have the backing of some of the elite teams like your Juventuses, Ireland Rugby, England Rugby, you're able to work with elite sports scientists, grow the product to in that respect. So, it's very exciting for me to come in after. Really, GPS was a very important part of my career, in Australian rules in particular. So now I'm coming into the other side where you're kind of helping, teams push their players on to that next level.
Brilliant. So we're all very comfortable talking about GPS. We understand it, but break it down for everyone here, just in terms of, what it is and what does it do at a basic level and how does it help?
Yeah, of course. Sometimes you live in the bubble where you think everyone's aware of what you're doing, but for those potentially that aren't aware of its significance in sport, most of you that follow sport will probably have saw guys wearing like a sports bra, the sports vest, after games when they're swapping jerseys, whatever. Well, housed within that, between the shoulder blades, is a small unit, and basically I can assure you, and the guys will tell you as well, there's no hiding place on the pitch from your coaches, from your managers. Everything's measured from your simple metrics like total distance, number of accelerations, your top speed, which wasn't very high when I was playing. Sadly, I got exposed a few times there. But more and more teams are looking for that kind of different edge. For example, when I was coming to the end of my career in Australian rules, it became apparent that it wasn't a lot of players will die off in terms of their effort and their intensity. There's a metric on the GPS that measures how hard you're working. As such, it can measure that you're running under fatigue, and that distance is calculated throughout the game. But I was starting games quite slowly. My metrics weren't great. I was finishing them off strong when other guys were tiring off, but that was a big focus for me. Why are you not starting quarters and starting games with that intensity? So I changed my warm-up. I changed my preparation the day before the game. So these decisions are being made at the top level. Sports scientists, in conjunction with the STATSports account management team, they're identifying small things that players just aren't quite there in terms of their overall performance, and working accordingly with that.
So in terms of technology in sport, from your experience, very positive, very helpful?
Very, very, it can expose you very quick as well. But certainly it is evolving in so many ways, and teams are really making it a key part of their preparation and performance.
Fantastic. Okay, Paddy, manager of Down, of course. We've seen some changes in the GAA. Has amateur roots, obviously, but tech playing a big part in, I suppose, the evolution of the game, as it is in all sports. There's various apps. I know some GAA teams are using, like Fit Light or MetriFit and things like that. What has been your experience? I know things have come a long way in the game, as you said, the fake tan included, but we'll not go there today. We're going to stay tech. But what changes have you seen in the game in terms of tech, and what's been your experience?
I'll leave Marty alone. The fake hands looks reality. When I started back working with inter-county senior players back in 2002, the only technology we had was a wrist heart rate monitor, which each player wore during a session. And it was something you could just monitor at that moment in time. We could check their heart rate when they were doing a session. And that is all we really had back then. But since that there's been a vast array of technology that's been used, from everything from monitoring player load to, you talk about GPS, to recovery, to heart rate training, everything from even sleep patterns, what you do in terms of recording diet, your nutritional intake, your rest and heart rate in the morning, just everything now that every professional athlete is using is now we're bringing into the GAA. So I think at the top teams in GAA level now, not even top teams, I say most inter-county teams now are making the most of whatever technology is out there. So I think there's always an appetite for the right type of technology.
Yep.
The key is there's so much available.
Yep.
And if you're not tech savvy, you'll probably find it quite daunting and even frightening. What
Yep.
do we use here? And I've always had an opinion that players need information that's relevant to them. They don't need the rest of the stuff.
Yep.
So if we can keep it as straightforward and relevant to them to improve their individual performance, and then collective as a team to make the team better, I think everybody's happy with that. What I do find at times is that there's so much stuff out there that we got to be very careful of where we go with it.
Yep.
I think that the
Yep.
stuff like Marty talks about, this, the GPS, looking at the work that's been done by Kairos here, it's fascinating at how this has been brought on to actually monitoring your overall team, what you could do in terms of communication as well.
Yep.
But there's another aspect of medical input as well that could be added on top of that going down the line, because I think we have to be careful that every athlete I have, every player I have, they're my biggest commodity, my most valuable commodity.
Yep.
Is that player. I have an onus on me to improve every one of them, whether it's physiologically, psychologically, technically, tactically, whatever. So whatever I can get out there that's going to help them do that, but in a way that everybody understands it, I think that's the key.
Absolutely agreed, Paddy. And the thing is, from a manager's perspective, of course, you played yourself as well, but just from that managerial point of view, I mean, just like the fake tan, the reality is these things are there. So I suppose, is it a case of how do we best use, what is there?
It is, and the biggest thing we have in amateur sport, I suppose, is different when Andrew's playing a Marty professional sport, or look at Mark on the professional sport of ice hockey, is time.
Yeah.
In amateur sport, time is our greatest, most valuable commodity, and we have so little of it. In a typical training week, if I have contact time of 10 to 12 hours a week with my players, that's as much as I can get. So in every minute I have of those players is valuable.
Yeah.
So I gotta streamline my systems to ensure that every single moment is being used properly. Otherwise, I can't have wasted time, because I don't have 5-6 hours a day,
Yeah.
12, maybe 15 hours a week where I have to get the most out of it. So I think whatever technology we can use to not, let's say, for example, players come to training on a Tuesday night. If he knew on a Tuesday morning exactly what is ahead of him when he arrived from 7 p.m. till he finished at 9:30, and had a schedule ahead of him, and knowing exactly what's coming down the line, and I was able to monitor that effectively, that I could adjust and change the sessions prior to the next session, that I mightn't see him for another 2 days. So I have to make sure that the time in between is used very well, and the time on the pitch is so crucial.
Totally, especially when each player needs something totally different, really.
Absolutely, and that's where, even going back, I was Coach Marty for a couple of years back in 2010-11.
No secrets now.
I was only a young boy at that time. But I remember picking his brains about what's going on in the AFL that time to see what he was doing and what were they working at back that time, because we felt if there was an edge there, we could take it in. But the time is the big thing, and that is so important to make it individualised as well, that we get the very, very best for each player to help them improve. And that's just one aspect of it. Then you got to improve the skill, and you also got to improve their confidence as well. But as Andrew alluded to, confidence is massively important to any young player. So I think if we can use technology in that way, it's very beneficial. Okay,
very interesting, Paddy. Thank you very much. Adam, you've had experience, obviously, as a player in the States, in Canada, where you're from, and obviously here. Would it be fair to say that ice hockey would be a bit ahead of the game as a traditionally American sport in terms of technology, or maybe if things caught up? What's been your experience?
Well, I think in the last 5 years or so, analytics in sports in particular or in ice hockey has taken off. I think before that it was a bit taboo, and sort of management and coaching staff and players alike kind of all thought that you can't really measure, I guess, the character of a player on the ice, and therefore the analytics didn't really mean a whole lot. But I think after that movie, the Moneyball, everybody really started to take it on and try and get that extra added 1% in whichever it may be. And all these guys here spoke on different subjects within technology and sport and how it can help. And something as simple as the iWatch that we all, or most of you guys probably are wearing right now. I tell my players to download an app called Pillow, and it tracks your sleep, and whether or not you had a couple glass of wine or a beer that night, or maybe you didn't eat correctly, that it can really affect your sleep throughout the night, and you won't see that until you've tracked your sleep for multiple months and understand your patterns between your heart rate and all the different things that affect your sleep. And one of the main things in performance is sleep. And I think that young athletes in general and older athletes like myself didn't really understand that. I think that it's something that can really be taken advantage of, and in the workplace as well, whether it be any type of business. The better your sleep, the better you're going to perform. So that's something very small, but it really has had an effect on our group. In particular, when I start to hear guys on my team talk about how many hours sleep do you get, or where did your heart rate drop to, now they're starting to realize the little metrics that they can take out of simple things like that. But on the other side of it, we've just recently linked up with a program called Instat, which is a Russian-based video analysis. And what it does is it basically, what would take me 5 hours to do on a video system, they've got it ready and available for us to basically type a player's name in and pull up all of his clips from the entire season and be able to watch a player from all over the world. What that's done for our recruitment in a sport where we're constantly turning over 10 to 12 players a year, that's very important to be able to just type their name in and be able to see certain aspects of their game that we are after. It's one thing to be able to look at people's stats on paper, but to be able to see it in person, you can really use that to your advantage and make sure you're getting the right person.
Fantastic, that's interesting. So you're already, as a head coach, using tech on pretty much a daily basis, would it be?
Yes. Well, for me, as I took over as coach, it's only my third season coming up here, but as I took over as a coach, the number one thing for me to wrap my head around was the video system that we were using, and basically how to cut game tape and all that fun stuff that takes so many hours of my day. But we also have a heart rate specialist on board who tracks through heart rate monitors and tracks the recovery time of each player, whether it be in practice or in games, and whether or not their fatigue levels might be leading towards them getting injured. And it's about trying to eliminate those small injuries that could turn into big injuries for us, because we don't really have a feeder system here in Northern Ireland for ice hockey that if somebody's hurt, we can draw upon to pull another player from. If somebody's hurt, we're playing injured, or we're forcing our coach to play. So we don't want that. Nobody wants that. So it's about making sure that we can get the most out of our players and make sure that we're taking care of them, their health first and foremost.
Brilliant. Sport obviously being about fine margins and those, little small things that can win games or tournaments or championships. I mean, presumably tech can just really help you, refine those small margins and really target them and work on them.
Yes, absolutely. I think, we're just touching the surface, I think, especially over here in terms of ice hockey. But, you watch the NHL, which is the top level of hockey, and they have iPads on the bench, and they're pulling back and watching each shift in between shifts, which I couldn't imagine doing from my playing time, being as tired as you are, but to want to see an iPad to see what you did on that last shift while you're trying to recover and focus on the next shift, that's an indication of where things are headed. And as well, I know with STATSports, I know that we've been speaking with them, and in terms of the GPS tracking, I know that we're an indoor facility, and whether or not the capabilities are there, but what that system could provide for ice hockey in terms of the speed of the shot, the speed of the player, the impact, the workloads, and to be able to share that with our fans on a big screen and show them exactly what is happening on the ice, because it's one thing to see it, but to see it in numbers and see the speed and the physicality of the game would be pretty intriguing to everybody.
Yeah, the fans is another interesting point, and we'll come back to that, because fans just want data, they want, entertainment, they want graphics, they want everything. I mean, I spent a number of years working at Manchester City, and it's something they very much worked on, is how do we engage the fans in a technological world but also still with a traditional game. So we'll come back to the fans, Adam, if that's okay. I think something that all of you have kind of touched on is the noise, I suppose, Andrew, and you know, obviously working in the sports tech business, there is so much out there. How do you cut through the noise, and what is it people want? We'll ask everyone here, but what do sports organisations want? You know, what I'm hearing here is maybe simple and effective. What are people looking for?
I think Marty touched on it there with a lot of the information that they provide to sports teams. And he said when they're working with Juventus, for example, they're working with some of the best sports scientists in the world. And whenever that's not the case, then STATSports can provide someone to interpret that. But I think that process is really important, because without that in place, then you're just providing the sports team with a whole host of data that could be quite daunting.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's just one source of data. Nordboard data from S&C programs, GymAware for lifting targets, scheduling programs. There could be data coming from Kitman Labs, another one for wellness and monitoring. There could be data coming from 6, 7, 8 different sources. And again, it could be daunting. It is likely to be less daunting for the sports scientist or the person who runs the operations or who manages the programs, because they can tend to cope with that. They're equipped to cope with it. But I'm not sure the athlete is equipped to cope with it. So that process that Marty talked about is really important, because the athlete just wants to know, right, well, what does that mean to me? Okay, you've got loads and loads of spreadsheets of data and insight, but that needs to be real to me. That needs to tell me that I perform better when I lift, whenever I hit a certain target in my gym program on a Tuesday, or whenever I rehab a certain way on a certain day of the week, or whenever I get enough attention for an injury, or whatever it is. There'll be something I'll need to put in place, but again, it'll be something very, very basic for an athlete. So there's the objective data that comes in to the sports team from all these different sources. There's also objective and subjective insight that the player themselves have. Again, for me, objectively, I know I'll feel, again, probably slightly subjective. Some of it will be rational, some of it will be irrational.
Yep.
There were times whenever I thought if I trained a certain way, or if I just stuck to a certain schedule, if I got a massage at a certain time in the week, that was my magic formula. Mm-hmm. It's very likely that's not rational. But again, even something that's irrational, if you feel like it makes you play better, often you will play better, or you'll have an excuse for not playing better. Again, so I think the combination of that objective input and the slightly more subjective player input, I think is really nice to get that balance where the player, again, just touching on what Paddy was talking about, feels like they're ready to perform.
Yeah. Paddy, something you mentioned earlier was communication, and I think in terms of tech and communicating, it's part of our lives. You know, I don't know what we did before, to be perfectly honest, but something that kind of strikes me is that kind of, I suppose, generational difference or gap, if you want to say. You're working with a lot of young players who they communicate differently to maybe you did. How do you deal with that, and can tech maybe help that, or do you consult the players? I remember Manchester City actually did a survey with the players and how they wanted to be communicated to. Is that something that tech can help with, or what way do you manage it at the moment?
Well, young people now are so tech savvy. I think they're so far advanced in how they think about tech. Each player now obviously has a smartphone. It's never out of their hands. Sometimes you have to tell them to put the phones away and talk to each other. Yeah. You know, if they're sitting around a table, you'll see 8 boys looking at phones and not speaking. So we have certain rules where no phones are allowed at certain times, just to encourage communication. Now, it's not too bad, obviously, because they're good mates, most of them. But in terms of communication, it's vital. It's become a vital tool. Now, I don't actually know what we would do without smart technology in terms of communication. Whether it's their university, they're studying, whether they're in jobs, no matter where they are. Some of my players, I had 3 players this year were in England, studying in England. Right. I have 4 boys working in Dublin, and then the rest of the boys maybe Newry-based or Belfast-based work. Some boys are out manually working on sites, and other guys are working in IT, and other guys are in banks or in accountancy offices or law offices. So you have a vast range of people in different areas, and the one thing you can't guarantee is if you send out that message on that group, they're all going to get it at some stage of that particular day or whatever. So there is that need for the communication, but essentially it's even more than that now. It's become to a stage where there's a way of using the communication very effectively to impart vital information at certain times. If there was a change in schedule or something happened, within seconds that can be transmitted. Like, for example, you go to a match sometime and the word comes through, there's a traffic jam on the road, a message sent out, and every car knows, don't go that way.
Yes.
Now, that might sound simple, but if you're in a change room and one of the boys is, you're as a manager, and somebody's late, where's he? What's he doing? Where's he at? It can throw the atmosphere within the room.
Yep.
So small things like that, even having that communication tool. But even with winter, as Andrew spoke about there, about the feeling good as a player, it's nice to hear something coming to you in a message. You feel nearly, they're looking after me, they respect what I do, or there's a concern that I want to do well. So a lot of the time, and I would probably one of the more like the coaches that would spend a lot of time communicating with every player.
Yeah.
I think it's important to have a very good one-to-one relationship with every player. And every single night I'll make a point of speaking to every single player, even if it's only for a minute. Every time I get a chance, how you doing, how's work going, whatever you're doing, or how you getting on training. But it's important you do that. And in a world where now face-to-face communication getting less in lots of the way we work, I know it works sometimes. If you don't communicate through email, nobody wants to know about it.
Yeah.
You want to get an email to say what you're doing, but I think that's having that player knowing that this person wants to know where I am at every time. It's important. It helps them along the way. So I think it's only going to get more dependent, unfortunately, maybe into the bad way, but we're going to get more dependent on communication through IT technology. But as long as we're using it in an effective manner, and also then having the personal touch, because sport's about the personal touch, it's about communication among people. You can't win a game on a screen, or you can't win a game through an app. You got to win a game by playing.
Yep.
And that communication with on the pitch. And I think probably one thing maybe, I know the rugby guys are great at it. I remember years ago doing a session with Neil Doak. He was working with the Ulster Academy, and I was taking a Tyrone under 21 session. And the two of us worked a co-session where we mixed in rugby and Gaelic football together. But I was nearly stunned by the level of communication the rugby guys compared to the Gaelic footballers.
Really, right? Okay.
Because these young fellas were speaking every move through from, okay, they knew the play, and they're around, and their communication so vitally strong.
Yep.
And I think that we didn't do that as much in Gaelic football. There's a lot of players go and play their game, and the communication could be well done or wise up.
Yeah. Yep.
You know, and we get a message on from a coach. But I think really now that what I learned about this is that the communication on the pitch is harder now. We have to encourage a lot more of it. We have to really coach communication.
Yeah.
Because people spend so little time actually talking.
Yeah.
Or it used to be natural years ago. So I think there's a lot to do with IT, but we got to be also clear there's a very personal relationship in sport that we have to be aware of as well. But certainly the technology is going to play a massive role in going forward. So any innovation that's going to help that, it's more than welcome.
Totally. And Adam, as a manager as well, would you echo that? I mean, how do you communicate, or how will tech help or hinder, or what way do you guys use it?
Absolutely. I agree totally with what Paddy was saying there. I was just speaking to a few of my players there a couple months ago about how we need to communicate more on the ice. And as a coach, you're always standing behind them, at least in ice hockey. I'm not sure exactly in every sport, but you're standing right behind your teammates that are on the bench. And when you hear them communicate to the players on the ice something that you've communicated to them in the locker room, it feels good, number one. Number two, we know that we're now helping that player that maybe can't see the pressure that's coming from behind. Mm-hmm. So it's about getting each player to buy into that and understand that your words are their eyes when they're not being able to see something. So it's certainly something that I need to work on and find a way to get everybody to buy into that and speak a little more on the ice. It's a bit difficult when you got a mouth guard in your mouth and you're tired and somebody's trying to hit you with a hockey stick. But certainly, when a guy he's under pressure and it's a very fast game, physical sport, and just like Gaelic and our GAA and rugby, we want to make sure that we're communicating and keeping each other safe and making sure that you're their eyes and helping out. So it's certainly helpful in terms of the technology side of things. As I spoke to before about the individual video that we can provide.
Yeah.
Now, we're trying to find a way to to make sure that we can have that in the players' hands the next day, so that they're able to watch themselves and learn themselves. And obviously, I don't have the time to go through a group of 22 players, everybody shifts from the night before, or I would be sleeping very often. So it's important that we can provide that, I guess, that technology communication with them, where I can send notes to them on their shifts, and I don't need to watch it with them. They can watch it themselves, and if they choose not to, then they're only hurting themselves. But that part of technology will really help the individual. Obviously, the individual's got to buy into it, and as Andrew touched on earlier there, I find that the younger the players are, the more bought into that they are, and the more aware they are. The older player sometimes is a creature of habit and doesn't really want to see that, and just they rely on their performances and their old ways. But sometimes you get the odd player that wants to learn and wants to learn about the technology in sport as well. And anytime you have that kind of buy-in, it only makes all of us better.
Yeah. Marty, one more from you, and then we'll open up for some questions. Just in terms of what STATSports are doing, obviously they're collecting all the data. As everyone would agree here, that's the kind of king. Data's king now, really. And is that something then that STATSports are doing? Are they helping to stream that, to collect all that data and provide it? So, like Adam says, players can sit down almost straight after a game, and is that what you guys are doing?
Exactly, and I think most of the top clubs will communicate with their players. We're talking about communication.
Yeah.
I had an interesting on-field experiences in Australia. You can imagine a rural county down boy going to Melbourne. I had to communicate in other ways because they didn't understand the word I was saying. One guy in particular would ask him, "So what time's training?" And he would just look and go, "Oh, yeah." So you have to get creative with your communication at times. But in terms of what STATSports, the clubs that we're working with to try and push the business on to the next level would be those clubs that are communicating with the players, because I think Andrew will agree with me, and Adam to an extent as well, and of course Paddy, that GPS results, particularly historically, have always been maybe pinned up on a notice board, and players have a look and say, okay, I'm middle of the range for the best teams now are motivating and empowering the players, giving them targets for their GPS.
Right.
So they're going to the coaches and saying, as soon as training's over, and STATSports in particular have the best live feed, they're saying, how am I going? How have I met my and as Paddy mentioned, the younger population of players are tech savvy, and they demand answers and feedback immediately. And that's the way it's going, and that's why STATSports are picking up a lot of these teams, because they can provide that.
Yes, and then that's driving performance then at the same time of being competitive with yourself
100%.
As well as with teams. Brilliant. Listen, that's been massively insightful. I'd just like to open it up now, because we've just under 20 minutes, but I'd love to get some questions. I'm sure some of you have questions for any of our panellists. We'll have a roving mic here if anyone has any. Yes, one at the back here, Niamh. Oh, you need a mic, sorry. One at the back, right at the back.
Thank you. We saw an episode in the English Championship Soccer League this year whereby a manager was sending out scouts to look at the training sessions of other teams to try and get an advantage. Do you see this happening similar with the amount of data now you're starting to accumulate on players, that there will be a necessity to protect this data? As valuable as it is to the individuals in the teams, it's also going to become incredibly valuable to your competitors in order to get an edge over those teams. And probably specifically for the companies, maybe like the STATSports company that's storing this data as well, the necessity to secure it.
Yeah, great question. Funny, that was Leeds United coach spying on Frank Lampard. I'm a Derby County fan myself, so you have my heart going there thinking about it.
You might lose Frank in the next few hours.
But no, it's a great question, and STATSports have went to great lengths recently to protect the data with an ISO certification, which is the level above GDPR, and the whole business was basically educated and, just totally and utterly, you had to know exactly what was going on. There was 4 or 5 guys came in to monitor what we were doing, to check the systems, to make sure everything's password locked and protected. And most of the clubs now are saying, let me see the certification, because if your data gets out for your top players, for your training methods, how you're utilising it, what metrics you're focusing on most, that's going to be massive, as you say, to close the gap if it's a competitor as well. So that's what we're doing. Of course, there's always dangers as how the coach. There's a lot of fluidity in terms of coaches who leave one club to go to another, things like that. More difficult to protect, but from a company viewpoint, and I'm sure Andrew I'll be finding the same. Without the data protection, now you're going to be in big trouble, and you're not going to have the credibility that you kind of need.
Thank you, Marty. Any more questions? No, nothing. I was just thinking there. We mentioned the fans, and we focused a lot on player performance on the pitch issues, but just in terms of the fans, in every sport, fans are demanding more content, more information on their team, their players, stats. Just maybe you can take this one, Adam, in terms of ice hockey. How have you seen that in terms of evolving technology for the players? What about the game as a whole?
I think social media as a whole has really brought the game forward, especially in a market like ice hockey in the UK, where we're not, I guess, a main sport. We need to find ways to grow the game throughout and reach people. And I think social media has really helped that in terms of the audience that we can reach. And I think that the Giants in particular have done a great job with that. On the sports side of things, social media has also helped me be able to reach a player anywhere in the world, as opposed to, I guess before social media existed, having to find the agent of that certain player to be able to reach out to that player. Now, what I do is I reach out to the player directly, and now I'm able to speak directly to that player about coming to Belfast. And most of these players, I guess, that would be the main difference between the sports in this country. I'm sure in rugby that they have to recruit from afar as well, but for us, players in North America don't really know the Belfast Giants exist, and they don't know the quality of the hockey. They don't know the quality of the SSE Arena. They don't know the amount of fans we have. So to be able to reach out directly to them and show them through a video or through just stats, showing them that ice hockey is here and it's here to stay, and it's not that far off the level from back home. Mm-hmm. That's how we now recruit, and it's more a hands-on approach because of the ability to reach people. And it's the same thing for fan engagement, whether it's through signing announcements or a certain player in particular that we know that's going to maybe catch the audience. We certainly want to make sure that we make a big deal of that through social media. And again, we had some success last year with some trophies, and that's something we want to use to try to build our brand throughout the city and throughout the country.
Absolutely. So just in terms of spreading the message and communicating, then that's very interesting, Adam. Thank you, Andrew. Adam's just talking about clubs and I suppose really their digital marketing, and they're spreading the word and really exposure. Players themselves now obviously have direct access to technology. They're their own brand in many ways as well. They send out their own message almost instantly. How has that evolved over your time, and what are the kind of pros and cons, I suppose, as a player?
Yeah, I think players are more and more aware of their brand and kind of owning that brand and communicating what will help them and aid that brand. But even we're talking about the supporters kind of interaction, and I think supporters are getting more and more nerdy about data and insight and understanding and getting objective feedback on players. And having commentated a couple of times this week or this season, I was able to provide GPS metrics on some of the players and the insight, and it's such a nice story to be able to tell.
Yeah.
It's nice to be able to provide that insight and understanding, rather than the narrative in the past would have been he's fast, but he's a little bit faster, and he's slightly faster again, and whereas you can say that guy's speed was this, his heart rate is this in the red zone in an intense pre-season session. It's nice to be able to tell that story a little bit. So I think supporters are loving that insight and that understanding. The one area of performance that I don't think is being fully captured is the decision making. There's a lot of physical metrics. All the stuff we talked about are all physical metrics, but decision making is one area that hasn't been fully captured, and I think it's really, really difficult to do. Obviously, that's why it hasn't been done. Professor Kathy Craig, who runs Incisive, again involved in the accelerator at Ormo Bass Ignite. She's developed a VR headset initially for goalkeepers. She's developed a product called Clean Sheet to enhance that kind of decision making for goalkeepers, and where that could potentially go could be massive in terms of insight and understanding. And you can tell whenever a player's a good decision maker, but it'd be nice to put a number to that. It'd be nice to be able to say he's slightly better in this position or slightly better in that position. I think that'll be a real area where we can enhance the narrative. We can give people numbers and data and insight in all areas, and then really, really tell a good story and just get people more intrigued in sport and the nuances in sport.
Yeah, I actually have a friend as well, Manchester, working on something similar. It's called My Hype with the company, and I had to go on the VR headset, and it was really quite hard, and it was all about decision making and reaction and that kind of thing. Paddy, are people still, when it comes to these kinds of things, we're talking about things, you put a headset on and you're reacting and your ball skills, are people still fearful of this kind of thing, or what's the perception out there? I mean, in terms of, is it still something people are wary of or welcoming, or?
Actually, the one that Andrew mentioned, there's that documentary with Tommy Bowe and Professor Craig. I take my students over there to the biomechanics lab in Queen's, the human performance lab,
right,
for module work, and Professor Craig, we did a few demonstrations of the headset, and they absolutely loved it. The young people, let's go back to what I said, young people will take on anything at the minute that they feel will improve their performance.
Yeah.
So I think we have no fear here of the future. And in fact, there's a massive opportunity out there if you have the right product, if the right thinking and the right brains behind it.
Yes.
I just think that the more people like Andrew or Marty or anybody that's involved in this tech business that have come from a background in sport, of performance sport, the better. At least in a consultation level or consultative basis with these companies, because you need to know not just the basic metrics and the figures and the data. You have to understand there's the greys, there's the blacks and the whites, but there's the greys.
Yeah.
And I would talk about the grey areas, things in between that make the difference.
Yeah.
So we can be very black and white when it comes to statistics or analytics or analysis, but it's the grey areas sometimes are the things that wins the games. So the more we know, the only people that know about the grey areas are the people that play it.
Yeah.
That understand the other aspects of the game. So I think going forward, decision making is massive. We can show stats of a player's pass completion rate in the game and assists to scores or defensive, whatever he may do. But there's a lot of wee nuances in there that only the player will understand, or people that have an analytical mind that can interpret the data effectively. Yes. Now that's where the key is. That's where I find the difference could be. Have I got someone here who can, in my statistical backroom team and my people do analytics, I don't need an awful lot. I don't want reams and reams of stuff. I need visuals.
Yeah.
It tells me the key metrics that I need to know that are going to affect performance, that I can shape how we coach or train up for a particular team. So we have a game this weekend. The analysis on the opposition has to be finite.
Yeah.
To ensure that we can, know what we're going to do against them, but also then what are we going to do to expose them, and how are we going to negate their strengths. So it's just understanding the game is still so vitally important.
Yeah.
And all this here. Otherwise, it becomes a jungle and a maze where people end up going back to, forget about it, let's go back to what we did in the past.
Yes.
So we got to get the balance right.
And there's no fears of it affecting the actual game on the pitch, is there?
Not at all. But I think if we get paralysed by analysis, it's the worst thing that could happen.
Yeah.
Where we're driven by analysis. I remember a few years watching players being withdrawn from big games, and the word come through that hit their limit.
Yeah.
But this player's playing really, really well. So why would you take him out if he's playing really, really well? Would you not wait until he starts playing poorly and then take him out?
Yeah.
So, or if he doesn't play poorly, let him play on. So that sometimes there's a human nature too you have to get into account. If you know your player inside out, you know this guy will push himself that bit harder. Maybe he's hit his metrics here now. He's done his 15k in the game. He's done his 3,000 high-speed meters. Do you take him out if he's playing well? You make that decision. That's what the coach has to know the player, know the game. So I think it's just getting this balance really right. So I think this is where these guys are so well positioned in this field because they understand the game.
The insight.
Yeah, there's a level of intuition and understanding, and that kind of just comes with experience. And if you try and I suppose, understand everything in terms of data and insight. They'll only get you so far. I've played in teams where it just looks like and defensively I'm talking about, we look so comfortable, we look so composed. It looks like everybody is reading each other's body language. We're reading the options that are available to the ball carrier, and where you should be, your position in the pitch, and it just seems easy. And then you look back at those games and you go, what do we do special? And you can't quite work it out. So if someone like Kathy Craig, or there's other people providing those kind of decision-making, understanding, just more subtle areas of the game, that'll go so far to getting an understanding of what it is. What's the magic formula to getting performance right?
Yeah. Marty, STATSports are leading the way, really, in the GPS, as we said. It's the world's leading data provider when it comes to sport. How do you guys stay ahead of the game now that you're so far kind of, leading the way? How do you keep fresh and with a world that's changing daily when it comes to tech? What are the challenges, I suppose, for the future? Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I suppose that it's that continuous improvement comes from reaching out. So you have the best clients in a number of codes. In rugby, for example, there's a lot of new metrics coming in there. We're working to expand into cricket as well, working with what works best for them for those kind of metrics. So in terms of the sports that we know we're really, really good in, football, rugby in particular, it's just contacting the teams. What are we doing well? What do you need? Meetings, focus groups with our sports scientists. You're employing the best software teams going around in this industry. You're getting a good sense for where the technology's going. There's huge investment in the company. The owners are putting lots of money through it. They're trying to collaborate on a whole number of platforms. So it's that drive to find what the teams want,
yep.
Also to employ people that are going to be able to come up with it before the teams even know they need it.
Right.
And that's certainly what you go upstairs in STATSports and you don't hear a word. These people are all just glued to their computers, typing away, constantly thinking, and they're perfectly happy not to be speaking.
Yeah.
Whereas downstairs in sort of the more business side of it, there's plenty of chat and messing about. But
which part are you?
I'm downstairs. Yeah. So, but look, that's where the company's going. It's grown so fast. But you need to talk to your customers. What do you need? And then you also need to bring to the table, look, what do you think if we bring X, Y, or Z? Will you trial it out? Will you give us the feedback there?
Yeah. Just finally then, Adam, where do you see, obviously you guys heading into a fresh season, going into Europe as well. Will there be anything different when it comes to tech or the way you use things? Or what does the future look like, I suppose, for ice hockey?
Well, I think each year we try to add something that's going to give us that little edge. Obviously, budget comes into play when you're adding these things. They're not cheap, and so each year we try to add something a little different. Last season we added I'm sure if any of you have trained at Bannintines, but we added the MyZone belts, and that gave the players the ability to kind of compete within each other, hitting each other's fitness goals and fitness levels, and you start to hear players kind of chirp each other and make fun of each other for not hitting certain goals, or guys are hitting leads. And as a coach, that's great for me to see, because I know that when they leave the arena, they're going and training and taking care of themselves, which is going to ultimately make us a better hockey team. So those things are little things that we've added, but hopefully next season we can add the one program I spoke about was Instat, that can provide the players with their video of just them and their stats and their analytics the next day, so we can have that in their hands as soon as possible. And then it also allows me some other time to communicate and as Paddy spoke about, better myself in those areas rather than spending so much time on video. In terms of other things we can add is, there's potential for in-game video, which can bring down to the bench and show players. Now,
do you have any in-game stats or anything at the moment?
We have in-game video analysis, but it's brought down to me in between periods where I'm able to look at it and review plays that, behind the bench, things happen very fast and you miss things. So to be able to see them real time in between periods and maybe adjust something that we need to adjust, that's important. Again, like they've all spoke about, it's important that we pull the things that we feel are very important and ignore the rest, because there's so much information out there for the players, for the coaches. It needs to be filtered correctly, or it can overwhelm you very quickly. So there's a lot of information coming our way. We just need to try to comb through it and figure out what we feel is the most important message to send the players. So we certainly use in-game video. We can bring it to a new level. Again, it's a matter of what I'm able to cope with as well as a coach, and not overwhelm myself with too many tools. I spoke with my brother, who's another coach in North America, and he had said to me, keep the analytics to yourself, show the players video, but the analytics are for the coaches to sort through. I don't want to be throwing too much stuff at a player during a game to kind of make them think too much. We want the players to play on I guess what comes naturally to them, and not make them think too much during a game. So there's certainly things we can add going forward, but it's just about adding just a little piece here and there that we feel makes us a better club.
Just very finally then, there was a talk earlier on artificial intelligence, and every one of you here has mentioned there's the sheer volume of data and information, and that needs time to process, and then maybe graphs or diagrams done and then fed back. Do you foresee a time when that will that will happen machine-led in terms of inputting data, processing it, and then feeding back to managers and coaches?
I assume, based on the way technology is headed, yes, I do see that happening eventually. But I think that in terms of all this data that we have now as coaches, it becomes kind of like communicating a system or something you want your team to play or do. You need to communicate it in the right way, or they won't do it, or they won't understand it. And it's the same thing with the data. If the data is not communicated to me correctly, that I understand it, I'm going to ignore it. And there's a lot of times that people will bring me certain stats that to me mean nothing, and if it means nothing to me, I'm not going to show it to my players and I guess confuse them. So it really is still about the communication, and in terms of STATSports and the program that Andrew has developed here, it's all about how you communicate it to each coach, and if they find value in it, then they're going to take it on board and show it to their players.
A good balance of the tech and the human touch. That's what we need. Brilliant. Any final questions before we wrap up for lunch? Anyone? We'll take this one here and then we'll finish up. Sorry, Niamh. Making you run.
Yeah, just a question about player safety. Obviously, in all of your sports or passports, HIA is becoming a big issue, and you're losing players, not just the safety for the individual player, but you're losing those players out of your teams for 6-8 weeks or longer. Is technology having an impact on that, or can it have an impact on that you're seeing?
Yeah, I think it is. I think as I mentioned earlier on, one of the key areas for any program, I think, is to involve the medical and a medical aspect, but maybe it's a maybe confidential thing too. But obviously, there has to be something that we can monitor players physiologically. We can look at all the stats in the world, and if you go back, Marty, CK readings and bloods taken in to measure muscle damage post game, which is a lot in professional sports, especially in AFL. 2012, 13 and 14, I introduced it as part of a pilot program as a research paper we were doing for workload in Gaelic footballers, and taking CK levels after training. And it was a brilliant marker, because then we were able to say to a player, your muscle damage is too high, you're going to warm up tonight, you're going to warm down, you're going to go home. I had a guy in particular who came to train one night, took his CK levels, they were through the roof, and he had played on the Sunday, it was a Tuesday night, but he had also expended 7,000 calories that day working on the site. He's a manual worker, so he had expended more calories than you would use in one of the stages of the Tour de France. That's before he came to training. But taking the CK levels allowed me to say, right, you go home, and I'll see you at the weekend. Give him the rest of the week off, and he come back in the weekend and played well. Now, if I hadn't done that, I was only going to further damage him as an athlete and as a player. He certainly wouldn't have recovered for the match the weekend, which is more important. That's one aspect where technology could help, by having that technology take a blood sample run it through the machine, and there you have your reading straight ahead of you. Now, that's quite expensive. Randux were the company we worked with that time, and they provided technology as part of a research study. But that's expensive for an amateur team, but as professional level, something you think you would definitely have. As regards the HAA with the head injuries, this is a big part of going forward too, and we're seeing it in sports now, and I think it's only right and proper that now these injuries are being really monitored properly. So if there's technology to improve that and how we monitor HAA rather than just a subjective opinion maybe from a medical, from a doctor, which is great at the moment and it's based on good science, but maybe there's something down there to improve it. But obviously scans and everything else going down the line are there available for us. But I know in Gaelic games that's very expensive, and whether we're fit for that at the moment, I don't know. But certainly in the future, maybe with more technology come on board, these things come down in price, maybe able to assess them.
Brilliant question, thanks, Paddy.
In terms of HIA, just making sure there's nothing gets missed. There is a technology available that Ulster use. I assume it's used in other rugby clubs in the UK, but there's a masseur who used to go to the games and just watch the games. Now he's in charge of making sure no HIA instances get missed, and he's got an iPad in front of him. He's watching replays non-stop. It's ruined the game for him because he used to enjoy the game. Now he's on duty the whole time, but it's brilliant for us because we got that reassurance that nothing's going to get missed and there's nothing going to be. Even up until recently, probably up until the last 6 months, there were instances of guys getting knocked out in the TV cameras and commentators diagnosing HIAs that a doctor wouldn't really have insight to as well. The other product that's being developed, I'm led to believe there's a product that's being developed to analyse the saliva of an athlete. Now, someone else might have a lot more insight into that, but it does sound like there's a lot of work being done to make sure that athletes are getting looked after and HIA is getting treated the way it should be.
Brilliant. Andrew, big round of applause for our 4 panellists. Fantastic, guys. Thank you.